Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It doesn't matter what time of night or day, I'm still just as happy that you stopped by my channel. Thank you ever so much. If we're meeting for the first time, my name's Reverend Paul J. Bern, and I am the online pastor of the online church and faith-based community known as the Social Gospel Worship and Learning Center, based in Atlanta, Georgia, sending blog posts and videos around the world. This is a church this is not a traditional church at all. We teach strictly from the Bible here. No added on stuff. No pomp and circumstance. Nothing like that. No political ideology either. What we do preach and teach about is Jesus Christ, crucified, died, and resurrected on the morning of the third day, risen from the dead. Only human being to ever do that, who ever lived. The only one. Anyway, it's going to be another installment of my ongoing biblical study series on the writings of the Apostle Luke. We've already covered Luke's Gospel. You can find recordings of that back in my archives. But this one is the book of Acts, the other book that we all know the Apostle Paul wrote. Pardon me for a moment. Okay. Yeah, correct a little mistake there. Anyhow, the title is that the Apostle Paul goes on trial before Governor Felix. This is going to be Acts chapter 24, part 1. The first 16 verses, and we'll stop there. Now, last week, last recording session, depending on how you're viewing this, when we were finishing our three-part in-depth teaching of Acts chapter 23, the Apostle Paul had been quietly transferred overnight to Caesarea from Jerusalem under guard, under orders from the Roman commander there. And so, as we begin part 1 of Acts chapter 24, today we find Paul being kept under guard in Herod's palace. There has been a 5-day wait for Paul's accusers to arrive. After all, this was about 2,000 years ago, give or take. But there was no more than about 63 miles that separated Paul from his accusers. That would have been roughly 3 days on foot, even for older people like myself. So Paul's accusers clearly took their sweet time getting to their destination. And so this week, as we move on to part 1 of chapter 24, 5 days have gone by. Paul's accusers have finally arrived, and Paul's trial is about to begin. So here we go, everybody, starting at verse 1 of Acts chapter 24, and I quote, 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor Felix. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. And I paraphrase here. We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation, everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix. We acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We have found this man, gesturing towards Paul, to be a troublemaker, starting up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to desecrate their temple. So we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander, Lysias, the Roman commander, came in with the use of much force, snatched him from our hands, and ordered, but the commander snatched from my hands and ordered, his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him. The other Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things are true. Next subtitle: what can happen when you hire the wrong lawyer? What can happen? Well, in this particular instance, right there in verse 1, we see an immediate problem with the Sanhedrin's case. They had hired an attorney to present their case who may have known little concerning their law, which we know today in modern times as the Mosaic Law. In point of fact, it is likely that Counselor Tertullus was ambivalent at best regarding his view of the law of Moses. Had it not been for his representing the Hebrew religious body in that particular manner, he was probably an agnostic or a pagan individual busying himself with getting rich. My point here, people, is that the Sanhedrin and all those with him had hired a non-religious man to represent them concerning a religious matter, and all this happened right in front of Governor Felix, who himself was another notorious pagan of his day. So, these super religious Jews weren't making very good choices. Choices notwithstanding, their lawyer presents their case, and then come the accusations, which begin at verse 5. And I quote, "We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to desecrate the temple. So we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came and with the use of much force snatched him from our hands. And and order his accusers to come before you. Close quote. As you have just heard, or read if you're looking at this on the blog, these utterances under oath were exaggerations at best. Isn't this what happens when people get accused of the same thing that happened to Jesus Christ when he was crucified? President John F. Kennedy, his brother Robert, Malcolm X, and Reverend Dr. King Jr. came centuries after that. Let's not forget the Spanish Inquisition, who slaughtered untold multitudes of people who refused to pledge allegiance to the Vatican. And, more recently, including the Salem witch trials of the 1600s here in America. Well, it's time for Paul to take the stand now. So moving right along, the phony charges the Jews lodged against Paul are especially apparent in verse 7. That's where Tertullus states that the Roman commander had taken Paul by force illegally, when in fact the Roman forces were present to keep Paul from getting killed by his accusers. This was clearly perjury, compared to Acts 23 verses 9 and 10, which would be part 1 of Acts chapter 23. You can go back to the archives there and find that still. Then in verse 9 of chapter 24, all those present from Jerusalem, delegation solemn from the Jerusalem delegation, solemnly swore that what Tertullus had presented was the truth. At this point, it was Paul's turn to defend himself in front of his bogus accusers. And so, let's move on to part 2 of this week's lesson, taking up at verse 10. And once again I quote, "When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, 'I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple, or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues, or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me.'" Paul continued, "However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way," that's capital W on that, "which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. And so I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and men, close quote. That was Acts chapter 24, verses 10 through 16. Part 2 of the lessons for study and memorization. Now, moving right along, Paul continues to proclaim his innocence before the court. In verse 10, for instance, the Apostle Paul's term, a judge over this nation, quotes, was a reference to the Jewish nation whom we know today as Israel, and whose lineage can be traced back at least 4,000 years. It was also a public acknowledgement of the common heritage that Paul shared with his accusers, an observation that certainly did not escape Governor Felix. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, Paul said, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. Continuing again in verse 12, my accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple, or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues, or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. Close quote. Scenes like this have been playing out wherever there is religious persecution, and this has been especially true for Christianity. We seem to get the worst of it. More Christians died for their faith during the previous century, the 20th century, than in the other. In the previous, 19 centuries combined. And so Paul continued here, and I'm quoting it one more time. I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law, and that is written in the prophets. Close quote. And so you see, no way did Paul ever say that he was anything other than a follower of Jesus Christ and the salvation of his shed blood. The way was actually a short way of saying the way, the truth, and the life. And the salvation, and no one can stand in God's presence without that covering. And yes, I mean a literal covering of the blood from the cross at Calvary. Absolutely nobody. And yet, in spite of all these things, at this point, as I'm getting ready to close here, Paul's accusers suspected that there was something special about Paul, and whatever that was, it enraged them. I have the same hope in God, Paul testified, as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. Close quote. If you're hearing that hum in the background, that's just the air conditioner in my apartment. There's nothing wrong with your set, okay? Now, to close this out, as I have just recited to you, here we have, or had Paul, saying in open court that he is certain of his innocence, far more so than the faith of his religious accusers. All who were of Jewish descent at these proceedings had the Mosaic law that was handed down by Moses and then his progeny. And Paul made sure everybody knew that he shared that same faith. Besides, the members of the Sanhedrin and the Temple Council who were present had known Paul since before his conversion, back in the days when he was still known as Saul of Tarsus. And so, even though they pretended not to, they all knew exactly what Paul was talking about, as he testified. But Paul, the apostle, still had more to say. And we will find out exactly what that was when we return next week, or next recording session, for part 2 of Acts chapter 24. I look forward to seeing you all back here again at that time. Thank you all ever so much. Now, normally, at the end of a church service, they pass around a collection basket. As you can see, I don't have a collection basket. I don't worry about it either. This is a virtual church. We don't have the overhead that brick and mortar churches do. But we still have a little bit of overhead. Besides rent and utilities and phone. I don't subscribe to cable TV at all. And my medicine, that takes up most of my Social Security check. My point being, I don't depend on this as a source of income, shooting these videos. I do this free of charge. I take no salary. And because of all these things, you will never ever hear me tell you to please tithe 10% of your income. Tithing is in the Bible, but it's not. The way they're teaching it today is totally out of context. It really is a shame. Be that as it may, I got expenses. You'll never hear me ask for 10%, but I need your donations to help keep this online. Doesn't matter what the amount is. To donate on PayPal, the email address for PayPal is as follows: greatestservant62@gmail.com. That's all one word, all lowercase. Greatest servant number 62@gmail. You can also donate on Stripe if you like, if you prefer that one. Go to Stripe's homepage at stripe.com and type in the search bar Social Gospel Worship and Learning Center. Press enter, click on it with your mouse, it comes right up for you. Just fill in the amount and send it off. And for all who can give, thank you ever so much. Thank you. I am humbled by your support, and I sure am grateful for it. Before we go, don't forget to give me a like and a share. Give me a like if you enjoyed this, and you probably did. Give me a share or two, if you would, to your own network of friends and contacts. And above all, subscribe. The subscription to YouTube is free. Just click the button that says subscribe towards the bottom of your screen down there. If you don't see it, scroll down, it'll pop up. Anyway, just click on that, and you're in. That's all there is to it. Nothing to it at all. Last of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for the privilege of your time. You are all so very much appreciated. And so, having said all that there is to say, everybody be blessed. Yes, I said be blessed. In Jesus' mighty name.